She had her newborn twins stolen without a trace, but 20 years later, a shocking twist reunited them in the most unexpected place. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Sarah Mitchell's fingers trembled as she clutched the small black and white image, her eyes fixed on the two tiny bean-shaped figures. The ultrasound technician had just left the room, giving her and Andrew a moment alone with the first glimpse of their children. "Twins," she whispered, the words still feeling foreign on her tongue. "Can you believe it, Andrew? We're having twins." She looked up at her husband, expecting to share in the overwhelming joy that had been bubbling inside her since the technician had pointed out the second heartbeat. Instead, she found Andrew's face carefully composed, his smile not reaching his eyes. "It's certainly unexpected," he said, his voice measured in that way Sarah had come to recognize from his conversations with difficult patients. Dr. Andrew Mitchell, rising star neurosurgeon at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, always knew exactly how to modulate his tone to convey reassurance without committing to optimism. Before she could probe further, the door opened and Dr. Winters bustled back in, her round face beaming. "Well, would you like to know what you're having?" Sarah nodded eagerly, reaching for Andrew's hand. His fingers remained limp in hers. "Congratulations, you're having 2 boys," Dr. Winters announced, pointing to specific areas on the ultrasound. "Both look perfectly healthy, strong heartbeats, good development for 12 weeks. 2 boys, Sarah repeated, tears of joy welling in her eyes. She turned to Andrew again, desperately seeking a genuine reaction. This time, he managed a polite smile that didn't begin to reach his eyes. "That's wonderful news," he said flatly. The 20-minute drive back to their Lakeshore Drive apartment passed in uncomfortable silence. Sarah stared out the window at Lake Michigan, its vast blueness sparkling under the May sunshine. She rested her hand protectively over her still flat stomach, already feeling fiercely connected to the tiny lives growing inside her. "I thought we could convert the home office into the nursery," she finally said as they rode the elevator to their 19th floor apartment. "It has that beautiful morning light." Andrew nodded absently, checking emails on his phone. Inside their apartment, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the lake and the Chicago skyline. Sarah had fallen in love with the view when they'd first toured the place 3 years ago, right after Andrew had been offered the position at Northwestern. At 32, she'd felt like she was finally living the life she'd dreamed of. Successful husband, promising career as a marketing executive at Landsworth Pharmaceuticals, and a home straight out of a magazine spread. Now, watching Andrew pour himself a generous whiskey despite it being barely 4 in the afternoon, she felt the first real tremor of fear. "I'll make us something special for dinner," she said brightly, moving toward the kitchen. "We should celebrate. Maybe that salmon you like with the dill sauce?" As she opened the refrigerator, she found herself humming softly, one hand resting on her belly. "Your grandma would have been so excited about you too," she whispered to her unborn sons. "She grew the most beautiful roses in Illinois. I wish she could have met you." Sarah's mother had passed away just 3 months earlier after a brief battle with pancreatic cancer. The grief was still raw, but the pregnancy had been an unexpected ray of light in the darkness. By 7 o'clock, the apartment was filled with the aroma of roasted salmon, asparagus, and fresh bread. Sarah had set the table with their wedding china and lit candles. Andrew was on his 3rd whiskey, standing by the window, staring out at the darkening sky. "Dinner's ready," she called, arranging the food on their plates. Andrew took his seat silently, picking at his food without enthusiasm. "I was thinking," Sarah said, desperate to break through whatever wall had formed between them. "We could start looking at names. Maybe honor your father for one of them? William is a strong name." Andrew set down his fork with deliberate care. "Sarah, we need to talk." Something in his tone made her stomach clench. "I've been offered a position," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Chief of neurosurgery at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles. It's the opportunity I've been working toward my entire career." Sarah blinked, processing. "Well, that's wonderful, Andrew. When would we need to move? I'm sure I could transfer within Landsworth or find something new. The timing with the babies isn't ideal, but I've accepted the position," he interrupted. "I start in 2 weeks." 2 weeks? Sarah's fork clattered against her plate. "But that's not enough time to sell the apartment, find a new place, pack everything. I'm going alone, Sarah." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and final. "What do you mean, alone?" Her voice sounded distant to her own ears, as if someone else were speaking. Andrew finally looked at her, his blue eyes cold in a way she'd never seen before. "Children weren't in my life plan, Sarah. Not now. Maybe never. But we talked about having a family. Maybe not twins, not right away, but—" "No," he cut her off sharply. "You talked about it. I listened. There's a difference." Sarah felt as if the floor were tilting beneath her. "This is about the babies? You're leaving because I'm pregnant?" "I can't have this distraction," he said, gesturing vaguely toward her midsection. "A pregnant wife, 2 infants crying through the night. I need complete focus at this stage of my career." "Distraction?" Sarah echoed, her voice rising. "These are our children, Andrew. Our family." Andrew laughed, a bitter sound that sliced through her. "Family?" He stood up, pacing the living room. "You've always been so conventional, Sarah. So predictably ordinary with these suburban dreams." Each word struck like a physical blow. "Ordinary?" she whispered. "I need more," he continued relentlessly. "I deserve more than becoming just another harried father pushing a double stroller through the park on Sundays." Sarah pushed back her chair and stood, her legs unsteady. "We can make it work. You can have your career and we can raise the boys together. People do it all the time." "I don't want to make it work," he snapped. "I want excellence, brilliance, to be the best in my field. None of that happens with 2 babies screaming in the background." "So you're just leaving? Abandoning your own children before they're even born?" Andrew disappeared into their bedroom without answering. When he returned minutes later, he was carrying a small suitcase. "Please don't do this," Sarah begged, tears streaming down her face now. "Andrew, these are your sons. You can't just walk away from them." "I've already arranged for the movers to come next week for the rest of my things," he said, as if she hadn't spoken. "I'll be staying at the Palmer house until I fly out." "Andrew, please." Sarah moved toward him, reaching for his arm. "We're talking about our family." He shook her off. "I never wanted this family, Sarah. That was your dream, not mine." The front door closed with a decisive click at midnight, leaving Sarah alone in the suddenly vast apartment. She sank to the floor in the kitchen, dinner still laid out on the table, candles burned down to puddles of wax. Morning light streamed through the windows, finding Sarah still in her dinner dress, curled on the sofa where she had finally collapsed from exhaustion. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her throat raw. She forced herself to stand, moving woodenly toward the kitchen for water. On the counter near the door, she found an envelope with her name written in Andrew's precise handwriting. Inside was a brief, clinical letter and a check for $50,000. "Sarah," the letter began without preamble, "I've instructed my lawyer to begin divorce proceedings. I'm providing this amount to help with the first few months of expenses. I trust you'll be practical about your situation and make appropriate arrangements. The apartment lease is paid through December, giving you ample time to relocate to something more suitable to your new circumstances. Andrew." She stared at the check, hands shaking with rage. $50,000. As if her children, their children, could be dismissed with a price tag. Sarah's first impulse was to tear the check into pieces, to reject his cold calculation of what her life and their sons were worth. Her hand actually moved to rip it, but then she stopped. She looked around the expensive apartment they'd shared, at the life that had evaporated overnight. placed a protective hand over the barely perceptible swell of her stomach where two tiny hearts were beating, unaware that their father had just dismissed their existence. Slowly, she folded the check and slipped it into her purse. In the bathroom, she splashed cold water on her face and stared at her reflection. She needed to call her boss, explain why she wouldn't be coming in today. She needed to call her doctor, confirm that stress wouldn't harm the babies. She needed to call someone, anyone who could help her make sense of how her perfect life had shattered in a single evening. Instead, she picked up her phone and called her mother, forgetting for a moment that there would be no answer. The reality crashed back when the disconnected number message played, bringing fresh tears. Sarah looked out the window at the vast blue of Lake Michigan. "You have me," she whispered to her unborn sons, her hand caressing her belly. "I will be enough. I promise you, I will be enough." That cold winter night in Chicago, Sarah couldn't have imagined that Andrew's cruel abandonment would be only the first blow, and that the worst was yet to come in the first hours after giving birth to her precious sons. The first sharp contraction caught Sarah by surprise while she was folding tiny onesies in the nursery she had painstakingly prepared. Twin cribs with matching blue bedding stood ready, a gift to herself using a small portion of Andrew's money. The rest she had carefully invested for her son's future. "Not yet," she whispered, clutching her swollen belly. "You're 3 weeks early, little ones." But the twins had their own schedule. Within an hour, the contractions were coming 5 minutes apart. Sarah called a taxi, grabbed her hospital bag, and took one last look at the nursery before shutting the door. Outside, Chicago was buried under February snow, the kind that muffled all sound and made the world seem eerily quiet. "Northwestern Memorial," she told the driver, trying to keep her voice steady as another contraction gripped her. The taxi driver glanced nervously in the rearview mirror. "First baby?" "First two," Sarah managed through gritted teeth. "Don't worry, ma'am," he said, accelerating through a yellow light. "My wife had twins. They're in college now. Best thing that ever happened to us." Sarah smiled weakly, thinking of the father who should have been holding her hand, telling her to breathe, excited to meet his sons. Instead, she was alone, clutching a small silver locket containing the only photo she had of her mother. The taxi screeched to a halt at the emergency entrance. The driver helped her inside before racing back to move his car. A nurse quickly wheeled Sarah to the maternity ward, asking routine questions about her pregnancy. "Name?" "Sarah Mitchell." The nurse's fingers paused over the keyboard. "Mitchell, are you related to Dr. Andrew Mitchell by any chance?" Sarah swallowed hard. "He's my husband. We're separated." Recognition dawned in the nurse's eyes, followed quickly by discomfort. Of course the staff would know Andrew. This was his hospital before he left for Los Angeles. "Should we call him?" the nurse asked hesitantly. "No," Sarah said firmly, another contraction stealing her breath. "There's no one to call." Hours blurred together in a haze of pain. The twins were positioned awkwardly, making the labor especially difficult. Nurses came and went, offering encouragement and concern in equal measure. Somewhere in her 14th hour, delirious with pain, Sarah thought she saw her mother standing in the corner of the room, smiling gently. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm so scared." A kind-faced nurse wiped her forehead with a cool cloth. "You're doing great, honey. You're not alone. I'm here with you." The nurse, Angela, according to her name tag, stayed by Sarah's side when her shift ended, holding her hand through the worst contractions. "My sister had twins," she explained. "Nobody should go through this alone." At hour 19, just when Sarah thought she couldn't endure another moment, the first cry pierced the air. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, lifting a tiny red-faced infant. 3 minutes later, his brother followed, their combined wails the most beautiful sound Sarah had ever heard. "Michael and Matthew," she whispered as the nurses placed the swaddled infants in her arms. Their tiny faces were nearly identical, perfect miniature versions of Andrew with her eyes. The weight of them against her chest filled an emptiness she hadn't even realized was there. "Hello, my loves," she murmured, kissing their wrinkled foreheads. "I'm your mommy." In that moment, looking down at her sons, Sarah silently vowed they would never feel the absence of the man who hadn't wanted them. She would be mother and father both. She would give them everything. Angela, the nurse who had stayed past her shift, snapped a photo with the hospital camera. "Your first family portrait," she said, smiling. "They're beautiful, Sarah." After feeding the twins, Sarah finally surrendered to exhaustion. The nurses wheeled the clear bassinets next to her bed, promising to bring the babies back for their next feeding in a few hours. "Try to rest," Angela advised, dimming the lights. "The real marathon begins when you take them home." Sarah drifted into a deep sleep, her body utterly depleted after the ordeal of birth. She dreamed of her mother's garden, of tiny boys running through rows of roses, their laughter floating on the summer air. A soft noise stirred her briefly, a nurse entering to check the babies. Through half-open eyes, Sarah saw a woman in scrubs leaning over the bassinets. "Just a routine check," the woman whispered. "Go back to sleep." Too exhausted to question, Sarah slipped back into dreams of her sons in sunlight. When she woke fully, sunlight was streaming through the window. Her breasts were painfully engorged, telling her hours had passed since the last feeding. Sarah reached out automatically for the bassinets that should have been beside her bed. They were gone. "Michael! Matthew!" Sleep confusion gave way to alertness. She pressed the call button repeatedly. A different nurse, not Angela, appeared in the doorway. "Good morning, Ms. Mitchell. How are you feeling?" "Where are my babies?" Sarah demanded, panic rising in her throat. The nurse looked puzzled. "They should be right here. Let me check if they were taken for tests." Minutes stretched into an eternity before the nurse returned, her face now tense. "Ms. Mitchell, when was the last time you saw your sons?" "A nurse came in the middle of the night for a check," Sarah said, struggling to sit up despite her body's protests. "Where are they? Where are my boys?" Within minutes, the room filled with hospital staff. Security was called. The maternity ward went into immediate lockdown. "Who was on duty last night?" demanded the head nurse. "Angela Thompson until midnight, then Janet Reeves took over," someone answered. "I don't remember anyone named Janet," Sarah said, voice shaking. The nurse who came in was younger, dark hair in a ponytail. Faces exchanged glances around her. "There's no Janet Reeves on our staff," the head nurse said quietly. The next hours passed in a blur of police, security footage reviews, and questions Sarah couldn't answer. How tall was the woman? What exactly did she say? Was she wearing ID? Had Sarah noticed anything unusual? "She was in scrubs," Sarah repeated, clutching the hospital blanket. "She said it was a routine check. I was exhausted from 19 hours of labor. I just wanted to sleep." Detective Gallagher, a weathered man with kind eyes, sat beside her bed. "Ms. Mitchell, we're reviewing all security footage. The problem is, someone disabled the cameras on this floor between 2 and 4 a.m. We're checking external cameras to see who entered or left the building during that time." "How is that possible?" Sarah demanded, her voice rising. "How does someone just walk into a hospital and take 2 newborns without anyone stopping them?" The detective had no answer. By evening, the hospital was crawling with police. Every staff member was questioned, every room searched, every closet and stairwell examined. Local news vans gathered outside, the disappearance of newborn twins making headlines. Angela returned, eyes red from crying. "I don't understand how this happened on our watch," she said, taking Sarah's hand. "We'll find them." But days passed with no leads. Security footage showed a woman in scrubs and surgical mask leaving through a service entrance at 3:15 a.m., carrying what could have been a large bag or a small cooler. Her face was never visible to the cameras. Sarah refused to leave the hospital, as if somehow her sons might reappear in the room where they were born. She pumped milk religiously, storing it in the hospital freezer, clinging to the belief that her babies would need it soon. A week after the disappearance, Detective Gallagher visited with grim news. "Ms. Mitchell, we've exhausted our immediate leads. We've interviewed every hospital employee, checked every camera within a 5-mile radius. Whoever took your sons knew exactly how to avoid detection." "You're giving up?" Sarah whispered. "No," he said firmly. "This case remains active. But I need to be honest with you. After the first 48 hours in an abduction, the chances of recovery—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "They're alive," Sarah insisted. "I would know if they weren't. A mother would know." The detective nodded, though his eyes betrayed his doubt. "You should go home, Ms. Mitchell. We'll call immediately if anything develops." Returning to the empty apartment was like entering a tomb. The nursery door remained closed. Sarah couldn't bear to look at the waiting cribs. Her breasts ached with milk that would never nourish her sons. The silence mocked her. She called Andrew repeatedly. After 5 attempts, he finally answered. "Sarah, I'm in the middle of a surgery," he said, irritation clear in his voice. "Our sons are missing," she said, her voice breaking. "Someone took them from the hospital." A long pause. "What do you mean, missing?" Sarah explained through tears, waiting for some emotion, concern, outrage, anything. "I'll call the hospital administrator," he said finally, his voice clinical. "But Sarah, I can't leave right now. I'm establishing my practice here and—" "They're your sons!" she screamed into the phone. "Don't you care that someone stole our children?" "Of course I care," he replied stiffly. "But what can I do that the police aren't already doing? You're being emotional." Sarah hung up, understanding finally that she was truly alone in this nightmare. Weeks passed. The police called less frequently. The news vans disappeared. Sarah's milk dried up despite her desperate attempts to maintain it. Her maternity leave expired, and despite understanding emails from her boss, it became clear her job wouldn't wait forever. 3 months after the disappearance, Sarah organized a memorial service. Not a funeral. She refused to believe her sons were dead, but a gathering to acknowledge their absence. Only a handful of colleagues and neighbors attended. Andrew didn't come. That night, Sarah drank an entire bottle of wine, the first alcohol since learning of her pregnancy. It didn't dull the pain, only made it more disorienting. She began a routine: work, drink, sleep. Functioning just enough to maintain appearances, dying inside a little more each day. Her performance at Landsworth Pharmaceuticals plummeted. Once friendly colleagues avoided eye contact, uncomfortable with her grief. 6 months after returning, her boss called her into his office. "Sarah, we understand what you've been through," he began awkwardly. "But your numbers have fallen dramatically. Clients are requesting different account managers." She nodded numbly, unsurprised when the conversation ended with a severance package. Without work to distract her, Sarah spiraled further. The apartment she could no longer afford became a shrine to absence. Unwashed dishes piled in the sink. Unopened mail accumulated. The only room she kept immaculate was the nursery, dusting it weekly as if her sons might suddenly appear to claim it. On a rainy autumn afternoon, nearly 8 months after the disappearance, Sarah sat on the floor of the nursery, surrounded by stuffed animals never cuddled and blankets never used. She held the hospital photo Angela had taken, her only picture of Michael and Matthew, staring at their tiny, perfect faces. Something shifted inside her as rain lashed against the windows, a clarity cutting through months of fog. "They're alive," she whispered to the empty room, "and I'm going to find them." While the flashes of the cameras captured the moment his world came crashing down, Robert Lawson couldn't imagine that the true punishment would come in the days that followed, when he discovered that the woman he had judged incapable of raising her children had become far more powerful and influential than he would ever be. Sarah placed the emptied vodka bottle beside 3 others in her recycling bin. The hollow clink echoed through her silent apartment. It had been 8 months since the twins disappeared. 8 months of fading hope, useless police reports, and nights spent staring at the ceiling, imagining her sons growing somewhere beyond her reach. The eviction notice that had appeared under her door that morning lay crumpled on the kitchen counter. 30 days to vacate. She couldn't even summon the energy to be upset about it. What did it matter where she lived when everything that mattered had been stolen from her? Rain lashed against the windows of the 19th floor apartment, the same windows that had once framed a perfect view of her perfect life. Sarah wandered into the nursery, the only room she still maintained meticulously. She ran her fingers over the dustless shelves, straightened already straight stuffed animals, and adjusted the mobiles that had never spun above her babies. The room smelled faintly of baby powder, a cruel, self-inflicted torture. She'd continued buying it monthly, opening the container to release the scent, as if preparing for a homecoming that logic told her would never happen. Sarah sank to the floor, leaning against the wall between the two empty cribs. She pulled the hospital photo from her pocket, worn soft from constant handling, and traced the tiny faces with her fingertip. "Where are you?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. Some days she went without speaking to anyone at all. The television droned from the living room, left on for company rather than entertainment. A news anchor's voice suddenly cut through her fog. In Boston today, authorities are investigating the disappearance of twin infants from Massachusetts General Hospital. This marks the third such incident in the Northeast in the past 5 years. Sarah's head snapped up. She scrambled to her feet, rushing to the television just as the segment ended. "Wait," she said, frantically changing channels, searching for more information. Finding nothing, she grabbed her laptop, searching "Twin Babies Kidnapped Hospital Boston." Articles appeared instantly. 2-day-old twin girls missing, parents devastated, hospital security breached. Sarah's heart raced as she expanded her search. Twins kidnapped hospital. Results flooded her screen. Milwaukee 2001, Philadelphia 2000. Each case unsolved, each involving twins, each from prestigious hospitals. "A pattern," she whispered, her foggy brain suddenly sharpening. "There's a pattern." She grabbed a notebook and began scribbling frantically. Dates, locations, details. In each case, security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned. In each case, the abductor had posed as medical staff. In each case, Sarah realized with growing horror, the parents had been either single mothers or couples where one parent was absent during the birth. Targeted. These weren't random crimes of opportunity. Someone was targeting specific babies from specific situations. Sarah moved to her desk, pulling out bank statements she'd been ignoring for months. The severance package from Landsworth was nearly depleted. Andrew's money, the $50,000 she'd initially wanted to tear up, was mostly gone, spent on private investigators who'd found nothing, and months of living without income. The statement from her retirement account showed a balance that would sustain her for perhaps another 3 months at her current rate. After that, nothing. Sarah looked around at the apartment she could no longer afford, at the empty bottles that had become her closest companions, at the life that had disintegrated around her. Then she looked back at the photo of her sons. Something shifted inside her. A tectonic movement of will and determination breaking through months of paralyzing grief. Sarah stood up, walked to the kitchen, and systematically emptied every bottle of alcohol down the drain. She watched the last drops of vodka swirl away, taking with them 8 months of numbed existence. In the bathroom, she confronted her reflection for the first time in weeks. Her once shiny chestnut hair hung limp and dull. Dark circles shadowed eyes that had lost their spark. Her skin was pale, almost translucent. At 33, she looked a decade older. "Enough," she told her reflection firmly. "They need you to be stronger than this." Sarah showered for the first time in days, scrubbing away the stale scent of despair. She trimmed her own hair, chopping off the dead ends in a blunt cut that fell just below her shoulders. The woman who emerged from the bathroom looked different, not healed, but awakening. At her desk, Sarah opened a new document and typed, "Plan to find Michael and Matthew." She stared at the blank page beneath the title. How did one person, broke, alone, and discredited, find two children who had vanished without a trace? The police had failed. Private investigators had failed. What could she possibly do that they couldn't? Then she remembered something Detective Gallagher had said during one of their last conversations. Sometimes these cases are solved years later, when the children surface somehow. School records, medical issues, someone recognizes them. But without someone keeping the case alive, actively looking. Keeping the case alive, being there when her sons surfaced. Sarah began typing rapidly. 1. Survive. 2. Build a career that provides resources and connections. 3. Position myself where I can find or be found. 4. Never stop looking. She researched universities late into the night. If she was going to rebuild herself, she needed credentials, power, a platform from which to search. By morning, she had identified several psychology programs with specializations in childhood trauma and development. Harvard's program stood out. Prestigious, connected, with faculty who consulted for law enforcement and child services nationwide. The application deadline was in 2 weeks. Sarah spent the next 48 hours crafting her application essay. She wrote about trauma from an intimate perspective, carefully omitting her personal tragedy while drawing on its emotional truth. She described her vision for new therapeutic approaches for traumatized children, approaches that would eventually help her own sons, wherever they were. 2 days later, she called Andrew for the first time in months. To her surprise, he answered. "Sarah," he said, his voice wary, "is everything all right?" "No, everything is not all right," she replied calmly. "Our children are still missing. I've lost my job. I'm about to be evicted, but I'm calling because I need the rest of the money from the sale of my engagement ring." After their separation, she'd sold the 3-carat diamond he'd given her, splitting the proceeds with him as a gesture of finality. He'd been holding half the money, $20,000, until she was thinking clearly again. "Sarah, I'm not sure that's wise. You haven't been stable." "I'm applying to Harvard's psychology program," she said, ignoring his condescension. "I need the money for tuition and to relocate." A long pause. "Psychology? Sarah, you're a marketing executive. This sounds like another impulsive decision." "You said I was ordinary," she replied, her voice steady. "Conventional, that I had suburban dreams. You were right, Andrew, but I'm not that woman anymore." The silence stretched between them. "I'll have my assistant transfer the funds tomorrow," he finally said. "But Sarah, this won't bring them back. You need to accept." "Thank you for the money," she interrupted. "Goodbye, Andrew." The following week, Sarah began systematically dismantling her old life. She sold her designer clothes on consignment, keeping only professional pieces she would need for school. She sold the expensive furniture Andrew had chosen, the art they'd collected together, even her wedding band. She kept only what could fit in her car, plus the contents of the nursery, which she carefully packed and placed in a small storage unit she paid for a year in advance. The day before vacating her apartment, Sarah stood in the empty nursery one last time. She took a small wooden box from her purse, a gift from her mother years ago, and placed inside it the 2 tiny hospital blankets that had briefly wrapped her sons. They still carried a faint scent of newborn and antiseptic. These, along with the single photo, were her most precious possessions. "I will find you," she promised the empty room. That night, in the barren apartment, Sarah opened a brand new journal. On the first page, she wrote, "Michael and Matthew, where you are doesn't matter. What matters is that I am your mother and I will never stop searching for you. When we meet again, and we will, I want you to be proud of who I've become. I want you to know that every day we were apart, I was working to find you. I was becoming someone strong enough, resourceful enough, connected enough to bring you home. I love you more than my own life. Wait for me." The next morning, Sarah Mitchell loaded her Honda Civic with her remaining possessions and drove east toward Boston, toward a new identity forged in the crucible of unimaginable loss. The woman who arrived in Cambridge 2 days later bore little resemblance to the marketing executive who had once decorated a nursery with such hope. This Sarah moved with purpose. This Sarah had a plan. Between the pages of her new journal, Sarah wrote a promise that would sustain the next 20 years of her life. "Michael and Matthew, wherever you are, I will find you. And when that day comes, I will be someone you will be proud to call mother." Sarah looked at the small cardboard box containing her entire life as she stood in the doorway of her new apartment in Boston. The space was barely 500 square feet, with a kitchenette in one corner and a bathroom so small she could brush her teeth while showering. But it was hers, the first step in her master plan. She carefully placed the wooden box containing her son's hospital blankets on the windowsill, the only spot that caught decent light. Next to it, she set the framed ultrasound photo, angled so it would be the first thing she saw each morning. "Home sweet home," she whispered to the empty room. September in Boston brought crisp air and streets filled with students. Sarah, at 33, felt conspicuously older as she navigated Harvard's campus on her first day. Students half her age hurried past in groups, laughing and comparing summer adventures. She clutched her campus map tightly, the sensation of being an imposter growing with each step. The psychology department building loomed ahead, its brick facade intimidating in its permanence. Sarah took a deep breath, straightened her second-hand blazer, and pushed through the heavy doors. Introduction to Developmental Psychology was her first class, held in a wood-paneled lecture hall that smelled of chalk and history. Sarah chose a seat in the middle row, not hiding in the back but not drawing attention in the front either. "You're in my seat." Sarah looked up to find a young man, perhaps 22, staring down at her impatiently. "I don't see assigned seating," she replied, not moving. "I've sat there for 3 semesters," he insisted. Sarah felt something flare inside her, a dormant spark of the woman she'd been before. "Then perhaps it's time for a change in perspective," she said coolly. He blinked, surprised, then grudgingly took the seat beside her. Professor Jameson entered, a tall woman with silver hair twisted into a severe bun. Her gaze swept the room, pausing briefly on Sarah before beginning her lecture. That first day set the pattern for what would become Sarah's new life. Up at 5 in the morning to review readings before her 6 a.m. shift at the Daily Grind, a coffee shop 3 blocks from her apartment. From 6 to 2, she served lattes and memorized flashcards during breaks. Classes from 3 to 8, then studying until midnight or later. Sleep became a luxury she couldn't afford. Rest meant time not spent searching for her sons or building the credentials that would help her find them. By the 3rd week, dark circles had become permanent fixtures under her eyes, but she was outperforming students with far fewer responsibilities. Her first paper, analyzing attachment disruption in early childhood, earned an A with a note from Professor Jameson. "Unusually insightful perspective. See me during office hours." Sarah approached the professor's office with trepidation the following day. "Mrs. Mitchell," Professor Jameson greeted her, gesturing to a chair. "Or is it Ms.?" "Ms.," Sarah replied. "I'm divorced. Your paper demonstrated remarkable understanding of childhood trauma," the professor said, studying Sarah with penetrating eyes. "Most first-year students approach the topic academically. Your analysis was personal." Sarah tensed. "I researched thoroughly." "Indeed, but there's a difference between research and lived understanding." The professor leaned forward. "Your application mentioned marketing experience. What brought you to childhood psychology?" Sarah had prepared for this question. "I want to help children recover from trauma. Marketing taught me to understand people's needs and motivations. Psychology feels like a natural extension." Professor Jameson nodded slowly. "Half-truth," she said, but didn't press further. "Whatever your reasons, you have unusual potential. I'd like you to consider a research assistantship next semester. The opportunity would mean fewer hours at the coffee shop and valuable experience." Sarah accepted immediately. 4 months into the program, Sarah sat in a lecture on trauma recovery when Professor Haynes made a statement that sent electricity through her spine. Traditional therapeutic approaches often fail with children who've experienced abduction or prolonged separation from primary caregivers, he explained. These children require specialized interventions. Sarah's hand shot up. But the Weizmann method has shown success with reunification cases, she challenged. The issue isn't the methodology itself, but its application. Children need expressive outlets beyond verbal processing. The professor blinked, surprised by the interruption. An interesting perspective, Ms. Mitchell, but the literature doesn't support. With respect, the Bennett study from 2001 directly contradicts that assertion, Sarah continued, citing research she'd absorbed during late-night research binges. And Carlson's work in Chicago demonstrated that art therapy combined with traditional cognitive approaches improved outcomes by 62%. The classroom fell silent. Professor Haynes studied her with new interest. "See me after class, Ms. Mitchell." Instead of reprimand, she received an invitation to join a small research group focusing on innovative approaches to childhood trauma recovery. Word spread quickly among faculty about the unusual mature student with exceptional insight into childhood trauma. By the end of her first year, Sarah had positioned herself as a promising researcher with a specific focus on children separated from their families through abduction or system failure. Her academic success came at a physical cost. She lost 15 pounds from her already slender frame. Migraines became frequent companions. But each accomplishment felt like a step closer to her son's. In her tiny apartment, the wall above her desk slowly transformed into a strategic map. News clippings of child abductions, recovered missing children, adoption fraud cases, all meticulously categorized and cross-referenced. Each month, she set aside 30% of her meager income for a private investigator to follow new leads, however tenuous. It was after one such meeting, a particularly disheartening session where the investigator admitted they'd exhausted all current avenues, that Sarah encountered Dr. Eleanor Winters. Sarah sat on a bench outside the psychology building trying to compose herself before her next class, when an elegant woman in her 60s sat beside her. "Beautiful day," the woman commented. Sarah nodded politely, quickly wiping away a stray tear. "I'm Eleanor Winters," the woman said. "You're Sarah Mitchell. I've heard interesting things about your research proposals." Sarah recognized the name immediately. Dr. Eleanor Winters was a legend in developmental psychology. Her work on childhood trauma recovery required reading in Sarah's courses. "Dr. Winters," Sarah stammered. "Yes, I'm Sarah. It's an honor to meet you." Eleanor studied her with kind but penetrating eyes. "You have personal experience with trauma, don't you? It shows in your work." The direct question caught Sarah off guard. For a moment, she considered her standard deflection, but something in Dr. Winters' gaze made her hesitate. "I lost my children," Sarah said quietly, the first time she'd acknowledged her loss to anyone at Harvard. "Twin boys. They were taken from the hospital when they were newborns. The police never found them." Eleanor's expression softened. "I suspected something profound was driving your research. May I ask how long ago?" 2 years, 1 month and 16 days, Sarah answered without hesitation. "And you're studying childhood trauma to help them when you find them," Eleanor concluded. "Not if. When." The simple confidence in those words brought fresh tears to Sarah's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. Eleanor nodded, decision made. "I need a research assistant for a new clinical study on trauma recovery methods for children. The position includes a stipend that would allow you to reduce your hours at that coffee shop. I've seen you there. You look exhausted." The offer seemed too good to be true. "Why me? There must be dozens of qualified students." "Because you understand from the inside out," Eleanor said simply. "And because I believe in intuition. Mine tells me you're exactly who I need." The position with Dr. Winters transformed Sarah's life. The stipend allowed her to quit the coffee shop. The clinical work provided hands-on experience with traumatized children, refining Sarah's approach to therapy. She volunteered at a local clinic working with children who had experienced loss and separation. One little girl, Lily, 7 years old, who had lost both parents in a car accident, particularly touched Sarah's heart. "No one understands," Lily told her during their third session, refusing to engage with traditional therapy techniques. "What if you could show me instead of telling me?" Sarah suggested, offering the child art supplies. That simple shift, from verbal processing to creative expression, unlocked something in Lily. Over weeks, the child created a visual narrative of her loss and grief, processing emotions she couldn't verbalize. Sarah built on this breakthrough, developing a methodology that combined art therapy with cognitive techniques, adding elements of play and storytelling. Dr. Winters watched with growing interest as Sarah's approach showed remarkable results with multiple children. "You're onto something significant," Eleanor told her after witnessing a particularly successful session. "This could be the foundation for your master's thesis." As Sarah's second year progressed, her innovative method gained attention beyond Harvard. A local children's hospital invited her to work with young patients recovering from trauma. Her approach, soon dubbed the Mitchell Method by Dr. Winters, showed particular promise with children who had experienced abrupt separation from parents. Each professional success strengthened Sarah's resolve to find her sons. Each breakthrough with a traumatized child gave her hope that when, not if, she found Michael and Matthew, she would know how to help them heal from their own trauma. On the twins' 4th birthday, Sarah sat alone in her apartment, 2 small wrapped presents beside her. A toy car for Michael, a stuffed bear for Matthew, gifts she would add to the growing collection in her storage unit, presents for birthdays and Christmases missed. "Another year," she whispered to their photo, "but I'm closer now, I promise." The following week, Sarah received her acceptance letter to Harvard's doctoral program with a full scholarship. Dr. Winters delivered the news personally, beaming with pride. "You're going to change lives, Sarah," Eleanor told her, handing over the official letter, "starting with your own." That night, as Sarah carefully placed her master's degree in the drawer beside her son's blankets, she couldn't know that her therapeutic method would soon make her a national reference, setting her on a path that would eventually intersect with her children's fate. As Sarah carefully placed her master's degree in the drawer beside her son's blankets, a seed of determination took root. She was no longer the broken woman who had arrived in Boston 2 years earlier. She was Dr. Sarah Mitchell, emerging expert in childhood trauma recovery. The degree was merely a stepping stone toward finding Michael and Matthew, but it represented something powerful. She was becoming someone who could not be ignored. 3 months after receiving her doctorate, Sarah stood outside a modest storefront in Boston's Back Bay neighborhood, keys in hand. The sign painter was carefully applying gold letters to the glass. Mitchell Center for Childhood Trauma and Recovery. Her savings, combined with a small business loan and a grant from a foundation impressed by her research, had made this moment possible. "What do you think?" asked the painter, stepping back. Sarah studied the elegant lettering. "Perfect," she said, allowing herself a small smile. This wasn't just a clinic, it was a beacon for her missing sons. The more prominent she became in her field, the more likely someone might connect her to 2 boys somewhere who shared her features, her mannerisms. The space inside was small but thoughtfully designed. 3 therapy rooms equipped with her specialized combination of traditional and expressive materials, a comfortable waiting area, and her private office. On her desk sat the photograph of Michael and Matthew, now 5 years old in her mind, though their image remained frozen in infancy. Dr. Eleanor Winters arrived for the ribbon-cutting ceremony, beaming with pride. "From student to colleague in record time," she said, embracing Sarah. "You've created something special here." "It's just the beginning," Sarah replied, her eyes fixed on the horizon beyond her mentor's shoulder. The Mitchell Method, as Eleanor had dubbed it, quickly gained attention when Sarah began working with survivors of a school shooting in Connecticut. Traditional approaches had failed with many of the children, who remained locked in trauma responses despite months of therapy. Sarah's innovative combination of expressive arts, cognitive techniques, and narrative therapy produced dramatic results. Children who had been unable to speak about their experiences began processing through art, play, and storytelling. Parents reported nightmares subsiding, classroom performance improving, and joy returning to their homes. The New York Times featured her work in a Sunday profile. Mitchell Method Revolutionizes Childhood Trauma Treatment. The article described her approach as groundbreaking, and Sarah herself as a rising star in developmental psychology with almost preternatural insight into the minds of traumatized children. The publicity brought clients to her door and invitations to her inbox. Hospitals, schools, and treatment centers across New England sought her consultation. Universities requested lectures. Publishers expressed interest in her methodology. "You need to write a book," Eleanor insisted over dinner one evening, 18 months after the clinic opened. "Your approach deserves wider dissemination." Sarah hesitated. Writing meant time away from clinical work and searching for her sons. But she also recognized the platform it would provide: greater visibility, more resources, expanded networks. "I'll do it," she decided, "but I need to be efficient. No more than 6 months from proposal to manuscript." True to her word, Sarah produced Invisible Scars, a revolutionary approach to childhood trauma recovery, within her self-imposed deadline. The manuscript combined rigorous research with compassionate insight, offering both theoretical framework and practical applications of her methodology. The day her agent called with news of a bidding war between publishers, Sarah allowed herself a rare moment of vindication. Conventional, Andrew had called her. Ordinary. The woman who had once been dismissed as having suburban dreams was now at the forefront of her field, pursued by the most prestigious academic publishers in the country. She signed with Cambridge University Press, which promised both academic credibility and mainstream marketing. The advance was substantial, enough to hire 2 additional therapists for her growing clinic and fund another year of private investigation. Invisible Scars was published to immediate acclaim. Universities added it to required reading lists. Clinicians adopted her methods. The Today Show invited her for an interview, introducing Dr. Sarah Mitchell to millions of viewers. Sarah appeared on screen poised and articulate in a navy blue suit, her once dull hair now styled in a sleek bob, her posture radiating quiet confidence. No one watching would guess that after the cameras stopped rolling, she would return to her hotel room to update the investigation files that traveled everywhere with her. The Today Show appearance led to a TED Talk, which led to international speaking engagements. Sarah accepted each invitation strategically, evaluating whether it might expand her search network, bring her to locations where new leads had emerged, or provide resources for her foundation. The foundation, Finding Our Children, was Sarah's other passion, established with profits from her book and speaking fees. It provided resources for families of missing children and funded specialized training for law enforcement handling abduction cases. As her professional star rose, Sarah lived with deliberate austerity. Her apartment, though larger than her first Boston studio, remained minimally furnished. Her wardrobe consisted of well-made professional attire rather than luxury brands. Every spare dollar funded either the search for her sons or support for other searching families. 6 years after establishing her first clinic, Sarah expanded to New York City, opening a second Mitchell Center in Manhattan. The following year, she returned to Chicago, a homecoming weighted with both pain and purpose. The new Chicago clinic stood less than 2 miles from Northwestern Memorial Hospital, where Michael and Matthew had been born and stolen. On her first day in the city, Sarah forced herself to visit the hospital, walking the same corridors she had navigated as a terrified new mother. Standing outside the maternity ward, memories crashed over her. The weight of newborns in her arms, the pride in their perfect fingers and toes, the soul-shattering discovery of their disappearance. Security staff eyed her warily as she stood motionless, tears streaming down her face. "May I help you, ma'am?" asked a young guard. Sarah wiped her cheeks, squaring her shoulders. "No, thank you. I'm just remembering." That evening, in her hotel room overlooking Lake Michigan, Sarah opened her laptop to update her journal. For 10 years, she had written to Michael and Matthew on important dates: their birthday, Christmas, the anniversary of their disappearance. Each entry detailed her search efforts, professional milestones, and unwavering love for sons who might never read her words. 10 years old today, she typed. Double digits. I wonder if you're having a party. If you have friends who make you laugh, if you play sports or prefer books, if you know somehow that you're missing a piece of yourselves. She attached a photo of herself from her recent book jacket. The sons she sought would no longer recognize the devastated young mother from the hospital. They would be looking for this woman, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, composed and accomplished. By her 40th birthday, Sarah had established a third clinic in Boston's suburbs, published a second best-selling book, and created a nationally recognized training program for child therapists. Her professional success brought wealth she hadn't anticipated, money that funded increasingly sophisticated search efforts. Her new apartment in Boston's Beacon Hill neighborhood was spacious but Spartan. The living room held comfortable but minimal furniture. The kitchen gleamed with barely used appliances. Her bedroom was simple, functional. Only 2 spaces reflected Sarah's true priorities. Her home office contained state-of-the-art technology that connected her to investigators worldwide, walls lined with books on child development, psychology, and criminal investigation. And behind a locked door lay a room that Sarah entered only on special occasions. Her son's room, furnished for 10-year-old boys with interests she could only imagine. Sports equipment, musical instruments, books for various reading levels, gaming systems. A room perpetually waiting. In the top drawer of her office desk, carefully preserved in archival quality storage, lay the 2 hospital blankets and the single photograph, tangible links to children who existed only in her memory and imagination. Despite her growing public profile, Sarah carefully guarded her personal tragedy. Her official biography mentioned only that her research interest in childhood trauma stemmed from personal experience with the profound impact of separation. Her colleagues respected her privacy, though rumors occasionally circulated about the haunted look that crossed her face when certain cases crossed her desk. 11 years after the disappearance, Sarah hired a new lead investigator, Marcus Reynolds, recently retired from the FBI's Crimes Against Children unit. His reputation for solving cold cases had caught her attention, as had his unconventional methodologies. "I need fresh eyes," she told him during their first meeting. "I've had investigators tracking the same paths for years with diminishing returns." Reynolds studied the extensive files she provided, whistling softly at their thoroughness. "You've been busy, Dr. Mitchell." "Every day for 11 years," she replied simply. 3 months into his investigation, Reynolds requested an urgent meeting at Sarah's Boston office. His usually calm demeanor was disrupted by an energy she hadn't seen before. "I've found something," he said, spreading documents across her desk, "a pattern I don't think your previous investigators noticed." Sarah's heart quickened as she leaned forward. The papers showed a timeline of infant abductions from hospitals between 2000 and 2003. 8 cases total, each meticulously detailed. "Twin abductions from high-end hospitals," Reynolds explained. "Always with disabled security systems, always with a fake nurse or doctor. And look at the parental situations." Sarah scanned the information, her breath catching. In every case, the parents were either single mothers, mothers whose partners were temporarily absent, or couples experiencing documented relationship strain. "These weren't random," she whispered. "These were targeted." Reynolds nodded grimly. "And there's more. 3 of these cases, including yours, involved hospitals where a Dr. Robert Lawson either worked or had privileges." Robert Lawson? The name meant nothing to Sarah. renowned neurosurgeon, currently based in San Francisco, sits on numerous medical boards and runs a prestigious foundation for pediatric medicine. Reynolds slid a photograph across the desk, a distinguished-looking man in his 60s with silver hair and confident eyes. "What's his connection?" Sarah asked, studying the face. "Still working on that," Reynolds admitted. "But here's where it gets interesting. Lawson's wife died in a car accident in February 2003. The same month my sons were taken," Sarah interrupted, pulse racing. "Yes, and shortly afterward, he appeared with twin infant sons. The official story is that his wife was pregnant when she died, and the babies were delivered posthumously." "Were they?" Sarah's voice was barely audible. Reynolds met her gaze steadily. "Diana Lawson underwent 5 documented unsuccessful rounds of IVF in the 2 years before her death. There are no medical records of her final successful pregnancy, and the twins' birth certificates were processed in California with unusual speed." Sarah stared at the photograph of Lawson, a cold certainty settling in her bones. "Find me everything about those twins," she said quietly. "Everything." While studying the report that rainy night, Sarah couldn't imagine that 3,000 miles away, her sons were preparing to enter Stanford as medical prodigies, following in the footsteps of the man they believed to be their father. Sarah stared at the photograph of Dr. Robert Lawson with mounting certainty. The distinguished neurosurgeon's confident smile seemed to mock her from across 3,000 miles. While she had been rebuilding her life piece by painstaking piece, had this man been raising her sons as his own? The thought ignited something primal within her, part rage, part renewed determination. "I want daily updates on this lead," she instructed Reynolds, sliding the photo back across her desk. "And I want everything you can find on the Lawson twins." The Lawson investigation became Sarah's obsession over the following months. As her professional empire continued to expand, a 4th clinic opening in Philadelphia, her 3rd book reaching the New York Times bestseller list, her private focus narrowed to a single point: 2 young men growing up in San Francisco's prestigious Pacific Heights neighborhood. By 2013, Dr. Sarah Mitchell had become a household name in child psychology circles. Her methodology was taught in universities across the country. Her speaking fee had reached 5 figures. Her foundation had helped locate 68 missing children and supported hundreds of families through the nightmare of child abduction. Yet success felt hollow each night when she returned to her elegant but Spartan Beacon Hill apartment. The trappings of her accomplishment, awards lining her office walls, letters of gratitude from parents whose children she'd helped heal, were merely tools in service of her true mission. 3,000 miles away, in a Spanish-style mansion overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge, 17-year-old Michael and Matthew Lawson stood side by side in matching Navy suits, valedictorians of their prestigious private school's graduating class. "And so, as we stand at the threshold of our futures," Michael was saying, his confident voice carrying across the hushed audience, "we carry with us not just the knowledge imparted by our teachers, but the values instilled by our families." Matthew continued seamlessly, the twins having practiced their shared speech for weeks. "For us personally, we carry the legacy of our father, whose dedication to healing has inspired our own paths in medicine." In the front row, Dr. Robert Lawson beamed with undisguised pride. At 62, he remained an imposing figure, silver-haired and straight-backed, his reputation as one of the country's foremost neurosurgeons secured by decades of groundbreaking procedures and generous philanthropy. "My boys," he whispered to the colleague seated beside him, "Stanford in the fall, both accepted into the accelerated medical program. They'll surpass even my accomplishments, mark my words." The colleague nodded politely, accustomed to Lawson's particular brand of paternal pride, one that viewed his son's achievements as extensions of his own legacy. That autumn, as golden leaves carpeted Boston's cobblestone streets, Sarah received a thick envelope from Reynolds. Inside were photos taken with a long-range lens. Two identical young men moving into Stanford University's freshman dormitory, their father directing movers with imperious gestures. Sarah's hands trembled as she studied the images. The boys, no, young men now, were tall and handsome, with dark hair that fell across their foreheads in a way that painfully reminded her of Andrew. But their eyes, she was certain those were her eyes, their shape and set unmistakably familiar from her own mirror. "Michael and Matthew," she whispered, tracing their faces. "My sons." Reynolds' report detailed the twins' exceptional academic performance, their status as prodigies fast-tracked for medical careers. Both had graduated high school at 17, both had perfect SAT scores, both had been courted by every elite university in the country before choosing Stanford, their father's alma mater. Yet their personalities, according to Reynolds' interviews with former classmates, diverged significantly. Michael was described as confident, competitive, and charismatic, a natural leader who dominated social situations. Matthew was quieter, more thoughtful, with a reputation for compassion and depth that made him beloved by a smaller circle of close friends. Sarah devoured these details, mentally cataloging each one. Michael's competitive nature reminded her of Andrew. Matthew's thoughtfulness felt like her own reflection. At Stanford, the Lawson twins quickly established themselves as exceptional even among the university's elite student body. Michael excelled in anatomy and physiology, his decisive intellect perfectly suited to the precision of surgery. Matthew, while equally brilliant, found himself drawn to psychology and behavioral sciences, fascinated by the mind behind the physical brain. "You're wasting your talent on soft science," Robert told Matthew during a video call in their second semester. "Neurosurgery is where you'll make your mark, just like your brother, just like me." "I'm still taking the pre-med requirements," Matthew replied carefully. "I'm just exploring options." "The Lawson name has meant surgical excellence for 2 generations," Robert reminded him. "You have a legacy to uphold." After the call ended, Michael found his brother staring out their dormitory window. "You know you don't have to be his clone," Michael said, surprising Matthew with his insight. "Says his perfect carbon copy," Matthew replied without malice. Michael shrugged. "I happen to love cutting into things. Always have. Remember those frogs we dissected in 7th grade?" "You were disturbingly enthusiastic," Matthew smiled, then grew serious. "But don't you ever feel like, I don't know, like there's something missing? Like we're trying to fill some hole by following his exact footsteps?" Michael was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But we owe him everything, Matt. He raised us alone after Mom died. He gave us every opportunity." "I know," Matthew sighed. "I just wish. Sometimes I wish we knew more about her, about who we are beyond being Robert Lawson's sons." While the twins navigated their freshman year, Sarah received the American Psychological Association's highest honor for her work with traumatized children. Standing at the podium in Washington, D.C., she accepted the award with composed grace. "I dedicate this recognition to the children who have taught me more than any textbook ever could," she said, her voice steady, "and to my own children, who inspire my work every day, wherever they may be." Only those who knew her story understood the deeper meaning behind her words. In the audience, Eleanor Winters wiped away a tear, remembering the broken woman who had sat beside her on a bench nearly a decade earlier. In the spring of the twins' sophomore year at Stanford, Matthew found himself browsing the university library's psychology section. A recently published text caught his eye. "Reclaiming Childhood: Innovative Approaches to Trauma Recovery" by Dr. Sarah Mitchell. The cover featured a photograph of a composed, professional woman with kind eyes that somehow seemed familiar. Matthew checked out the book on impulse, reading it cover to cover that weekend. "This is incredible," he told his roommate. "Her approach to childhood trauma is revolutionary, integrating neuroscience with expressive therapies in a way that actually respects children's innate resilience." The following semester, Matthew registered for an elective in child psychology, much to his father's disapproval. "Dabbling in psychiatry is a distraction from your surgical training," Robert said during his monthly visit to campus. "Your brother isn't wasting time on these soft sciences." "Michael and I aren't the same person," Matthew replied, a rare edge in his voice. Robert's eyes narrowed. "You have my name, my legacy. Excellence isn't optional in this family, Matthew. It's mandatory." Later that night, alone in his room, Matthew confided in his brother. "Sometimes I feel this emptiness, like there's a part of our story missing." Michael, typing notes for an organic chemistry exam, paused. "What do you mean?" "Dad never talks about Mom except in these rehearsed anecdotes. We have, 3 photos of her pregnant? None of her holding us as babies." Matthew ran a hand through his hair, a gesture identical to one Sarah made when troubled. "Don't you ever wonder?" "About what?" Michael asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. "About who we really are, where we come from. Sometimes I dream about, I don't know, another life, another home. It's probably stupid." Michael closed his laptop, his usual confidence momentarily absent. "It's not stupid. I have those dreams too." In Boston, Sarah continued her annual ritual on the twins' 20th birthday. She opened the special drawer containing their hospital blankets, now carefully preserved in archival wrapping to protect the fabric from deterioration. Beside them lay 19 sets of unopened birthday gifts, small tokens for milestones she had missed. For their 20th, she had chosen leather-bound journals, each inscribed with their initials. Journals like the one she had kept for them all these years, documenting her search, her growth, her unwavering love. "Another year," she whispered to the empty room, "but I'm getting closer." 3 weeks later, an email arrived that sent her heart racing. The subject line read simply, "Stanford Medical Symposium, Keynote Invitation." The prestigious International Symposium on Childhood Trauma would feature leading researchers from around the world, and they wanted Dr. Sarah Mitchell as their keynote speaker. The date was set for January 2023, less than 6 months away. Sarah's finger hovered over the acceptance button when another detail caught her eye. Listed among the symposium's sponsors was the Lawson Foundation for Pediatric Medicine. She clicked "Accept" immediately. That evening, she called Reynolds. "I need everything about the symposium. Who's attending, full participant lists when they become available, security protocols, floor plans of all venues." "You think they'll be there?" Reynolds asked. "The twins?" "Robert Lawson never misses an opportunity to showcase his family's medical dynasty," Sarah replied. "And if they're studying medicine at Stanford where the symposium is being held—" "I'll get on it immediately," Reynolds promised. As autumn faded into winter, Sarah prepared meticulously for the symposium. Her keynote address was crafted and refined, but her true focus lay elsewhere, on the possibility of finally seeing her sons in person, perhaps even speaking to them. Meanwhile, at Stanford Medical School, Matthew Lawson sat in the library, reviewing materials for final exams. A flyer on the bulletin board caught his attention: the upcoming International Symposium on Childhood Trauma and Recovery. Listed as keynote speaker was Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the author whose work had so inspired him. Matthew snapped a photo of the flyer, intending to register as a student attendee. As he walked back to his desk, the photograph of the featured speaker laying on the desk, the same woman from the book cover, with those strangely familiar eyes, passed momentarily out of his sight, just another unnoticed detail in a busy student's life. While Sarah confirmed her participation in the Stanford Symposium, she couldn't imagine that fate had arranged an inevitable encounter, and that a pair of eyes identical to her own would be watching her speech from the first row, feeling an inexplicable connection. San Francisco welcomed Sarah with uncharacteristically clear January skies as her plane descended toward SFO. From her window seat, she could see the Golden Gate Bridge cutting through the morning fog, a sight that would normally inspire awe. Today, however, Sarah felt only a growing sense of purpose tinged with apprehension. Somewhere in this city, the man who had stolen her children was living his life in plain sight, celebrated as a medical pioneer and philanthropist. The taxi ride to her hotel provided glimpses of Stanford University's sprawling campus in the distance. Sarah checked her reflection in her compact mirror. At 52, she looked polished and professional, her chestnut hair now highlighted with subtle streaks of silver that she had chosen not to color. Time had etched fine lines around her eyes, but they carried the determined focus that had become her signature look. "First time in Stanford?" the driver asked conversationally. "First time," Sarah confirmed, not volunteering that it might be the most important trip of her life. The Grand Hyatt's presidential suite felt excessive, but Sarah had learned that appearing successful opened doors that remained closed to those who seemed desperate. The room's panoramic views of the bay provided the perfect backdrop for reviewing her presentation materials one final time. On the mahogany desk, she arranged her laptop, speaking notes, and the dossier Reynolds had compiled on the Lawson family. The most recent photographs showed the twins at a charity gala 3 months earlier. Handsome young men in tuxedos, standing proudly beside their father. Michael with his confident smile, Matthew with his thoughtful eyes. Her eyes. 20 years, she whispered, touching the image. "I'm finally here." Sarah methodically unpacked her presentation wardrobe, a navy Armani suit for the keynote, a burgundy silk blouse and black trousers for the reception, casual but elegant attire for the workshops. Each item had been selected to project authority and competence. Today's video conference with the symposium organizers would be her first opportunity to potentially see Robert Lawson in real time. At precisely 2 o'clock, Sarah logged into the conference platform. Faces began appearing in squares across her screen. Department heads, foundation representatives, key speakers. Her practiced smile revealed nothing of the storm brewing inside her as she scanned the participants. "Dr. Mitchell, welcome!" exclaimed Dr. Harris, the symposium chair. "We're thrilled to have you with us." "The honor is mine," Sarah replied smoothly. "The program you've assembled is extraordinary." As introductions continued around the virtual room, a new square illuminated. "Apologies for my tardiness," came a deep, confident voice. "Surgery ran longer than anticipated." Sarah's breath caught as Dr. Robert Lawson's face appeared on her screen. Distinguished, silver-haired, with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to deference, he looked exactly like his photographs. "Dr. Mitchell," Lawson nodded with practiced cordiality, "your books on childhood resilience have transformed our approach in the pediatric department. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, if only virtually for now." Sarah maintained her professional smile while her heart hammered against her ribs. "Likewise, Dr. Lawson, your foundation's work is well known." The meeting proceeded with discussions of scheduling, facility arrangements, and protocol for the upcoming symposium. Sarah participated actively, offering suggestions and answering questions while a part of her mind remained hyper-aware of Lawson's every expression and comment. "Before we conclude," Lawson said as the meeting wound down, "I'd like to mention that my sons, both residents in neurology at Stanford, expressed particular interest in your keynote, Dr. Mitchell. They've studied your methodologies extensively." Sarah's fingers tightened imperceptibly around her pen. "I'm flattered," she replied evenly. "I always enjoy engaging with the next generation of practitioners." "Perhaps we can arrange a meeting during your visit," Lawson continued. "They've been exploring connections between neurological trauma and psychological recovery that might interest you." "I'd welcome that opportunity," Sarah said, amazed at how steady her voice remained while her thoughts raced. Was this coincidence, or had the universe finally aligned in her favor? After the meeting ended, Sarah sat motionless, staring at her darkened screen. 20 years of searching, and suddenly her sons might be delivered directly to her through their kidnapper's own arrogance. The chime of an incoming email broke her reverie. Sarah opened it, expecting symposium materials. Instead, her screen filled with an image that stopped her breath. Two young men in white coats, standing together outside Stanford Medical Center. The identical faces that had haunted her dreams for 20 years, now grown into adulthood, smiling at the camera. The message below contained only a few words. Procure pelos gêmeos Lawson, estudantes de medicina em Stanford. DNA não mente, eles têm seu sangue. Sarah didn't need the translation from Portuguese. The message was clear. Look for the Lawson twins, medical students at Stanford. DNA doesn't lie. They have your blood. With trembling fingers, Sarah forwarded the email to Reynolds, adding only, "Who sent this?" His response came within minutes. Untraceable, anonymous remailer, investigating. Sarah opened a new browser window and typed, Michael and Matthew Lawson Stanford. Hundreds of results appeared immediately. Academic honors, research papers, charity events. The boys were not merely students. They were stars, featured in university publications and local news stories as prodigies following in their renowned father's footsteps. She clicked through dozens of articles, absorbing every detail. Both were in Stanford's accelerated MD-PhD program. Michael was focusing on neurosurgical techniques, already assisting in procedures alongside senior surgeons. Matthew was pursuing a dual specialization in neurology and pediatric psychiatry, with research on trauma's effects on developing brains. One article particularly caught her attention. Lawson twins honored at Foundation Gala. Father shares touching tribute to late mother. The piece included Robert Lawson's speech about his late wife Diana, who would have been so proud of the fine young men her sons have become. Sarah's investigative instincts flared. She searched Diana Lawson Death 2003 and found the obituary and several news items about the tragic car accident that had claimed the life of the pregnant wife of the prominent neurosurgeon. The stories all mentioned the miracle of the twins' survival, delivered by emergency C-section after their mother's death. Working methodically through the night, Sarah constructed a timeline. Diana Lawson's accident occurred on February 6, 2003, just 2 days after Sarah's twins had disappeared from Northwestern Memorial. The coincidence was too perfect, the timing too convenient. Morning found Sarah still at her computer, surrounded by notes and printouts. She located medical records indicating Diana Lawson had undergone 5 unsuccessful rounds of IVF between 2000 and 2002. The last attempt had been declared a failure in November 2002, just 3 months before the twins' miraculous birth. Sarah's phone rang at 7:30 a.m. It was Reynolds. "I've been working through the night," he said without preamble. "I found something. Diana Lawson's obstetrician from her supposed final pregnancy, Dr. Elaine Webster? She doesn't exist. The name appears on birth records, but there's no licensed physician by that name in California during that period." "Fabricated records," Sarah murmured. "It gets better," Reynolds continued. "I tracked down a retired nurse who worked at the hospital where Diana supposedly died. She remembers the case clearly because of the high-profile nature and the miracle babies. Says she never saw the babies until after they were delivered. Robert Lawson appeared with them already wrapped and cleaned." Sarah closed her eyes briefly. "He brought them directly from Chicago. That's my guess. I'm still working on tracking the actual transport. Private planes, maybe." "We need DNA," Sarah said decisively. "Already working on it, but it'll have to be obtained covertly. If we tip our hand too soon, he might run," Sarah finished. "Or worse, convince the boys we're crazy. He's had 20 years to cement his version of reality." After ending the call, Sarah reviewed her symposium schedule. She would arrive 4 days before her keynote to participate in panels and workshops. 4 days to gather evidence, to observe her sons, perhaps even to obtain the DNA samples they needed to prove what she already knew in her heart. She pulled up the symposium's complete program. On the second day, there was a presentation by residents on neurological approaches to trauma recovery. Listed among the presenters, M. Lawson and M. Lawson. Sarah registered for the session immediately, then walked to her hotel window. The sun was rising over San Francisco Bay, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. For the first time in 20 years, she allowed herself to feel something dangerous: hope. Her phone chimed with another email, the complete attendee list for the symposium. She scrolled through it quickly, noting the presence of both Robert Lawson and his sons. They were listed separately: Michael Lawson and Matthew Lawson, not as M. Lawson, as on the presentation schedule. "Michael and Matthew," she whispered, savoring the names she had chosen so long ago. What were the odds that the man who stole her children would have kept their given names? Was it arrogance, convenience, or some twisted form of penance? Sarah spent the day finalizing her keynote address, but her mind continually drifted to the upcoming presentation by her sons. Would she recognize something of herself in them? A gesture, a mannerism, a turn of phrase? Would they sense some inexplicable connection to her? That evening, she ordered room service and spread her investigation materials across the king-sized bed. Photos of the twins through the years, articles about their achievements, everything Reynolds had compiled on Robert Lawson. She studied the boys' faces in each image, searching for traces of herself and Andrew. Michael had Andrew's confident jawline and commanding presence. Matthew shared her contemplative expression and the small furrow that appeared between his brows when concentrating. Both had her eyes, shape, color, even the slight tilt at the corners. With a week still to go before the symposium, Sarah knew she needed more definitive evidence. A DNA test would be conclusive, but obtaining samples without alerting the Lawsons would require careful planning. The solution came in the form of a pre-symposium reception for keynote speakers and resident presenters, scheduled for the following evening. Sarah would have the opportunity to meet the twins in person, to speak with them directly. The thought both terrified and exhilarated her. She selected her outfit carefully: a cashmere sweater and tailored trousers in muted tones, professional but approachable. Nothing that would mark her as a threat. Her plan was simple: engage the twins in conversation, perhaps over drinks, and secure the glasses or bottles they used for DNA testing. That night, Sarah dreamed of her sons as babies, their tiny hands clutching her fingers. In the dream, they grew before her eyes, from infants to toddlers to teenagers, always just beyond her reach. She woke with tears on her cheeks, but determination in her heart. With trembling hands, Sarah reserved a seat for the Lawson twins' presentation scheduled for the day after tomorrow, unaware that a simple water glass abandoned afterward would give her the definitive proof that she had found what she had been searching for 20 years. Sarah adjusted her dark sunglasses and wrapped the silk scarf more tightly around her head as she slipped into the back row of the lecture hall. Her heart hammered against her ribs with such force she feared others might hear it. The room was already half filled with medical students and faculty, all waiting for the presentation on neurological approaches to trauma recovery by the Lawson twins. She had deliberately arrived early, selecting a seat that offered clear visibility without making her conspicuous. From her leather messenger bag, she removed a small notebook and pen, props to complete her disguise as just another interested professional. The door at the side of the lecture hall opened, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. There they were, her sons, walking confidently to the podium. In person, they were even more striking than in photographs. Both tall and lean, moving with the easy grace that comes from lifelong privilege and confidence. Both wore crisp white coats over blue dress shirts, their hospital IDs clipped to their pockets. "Good afternoon," Michael began, his voice strong and assured. "I'm Michael Lawson, and this is my brother Matthew. We're third-year residents in the neurology department, and today we'll be presenting our research on neuroplasticity in trauma recovery." Matthew stepped forward, his manner slightly more reserved than his brother's. "We've been particularly focused on the intersection of neurological interventions and psychological approaches, with special attention to childhood trauma cases." Sarah's fingers tightened around her pen as she studied them, cataloging every detail. Michael gestured emphatically when making key points, just as Andrew had during their courtship. Matthew had a habit of touching his chin while considering questions, exactly as she did when deep in thought. Their voices were different, Michael's confident and commanding, Matthew's thoughtful and measured, but both had the same slight dimple in their left cheek when they smiled. When Matthew smiled during a particularly insightful question from the audience, Sarah had to stifle a gasp. It was her smile, precisely. The slight asymmetry, the way it reached his eyes. Tears formed behind her sunglasses, and she was grateful for the dark lenses. Recent studies, including the groundbreaking work of Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Matthew was saying, suggest that expressive therapies can create new neural pathways in children who have experienced severe trauma. Sarah froze at the mention of her name. Her own son was citing her research, unaware of their connection. Mitchell's integration of art therapy with cognitive approaches shows promising results in rewiring trauma responses, Michael continued. Our own trials with pediatric patients have supported her findings. The presentation continued for 45 minutes, during which Sarah remained completely still, absorbing every word, every gesture, every interaction between the brothers. They moved in tandem, complementing each other's strengths. Michael more technical and data-driven, Matthew more intuitive and patient-focused. During the Q&A session, a young woman asked about potential applications for children separated from parents. Matthew took the question, his response thoughtful. Separation trauma creates unique challenges because it disrupts fundamental attachment structures, he explained. Our work suggests that addressing both the neurological and psychological components simultaneously yields better outcomes. When the session ended, attendees gathered around the twins, asking follow-up questions and offering congratulations. Sarah remained seated, watching, waiting. Finally, as the crowd thinned, she saw her opportunity. The twins had stopped at the water station near the door, each taking a paper cup. Moving casually, Sarah approached the refreshment table, positioning herself near enough to observe without drawing attention. Matthew drained his water and set the cup down before being drawn into conversation with a professor. Michael did the same moments later, leaving his cup on the table as he turned to answer a question. With practiced nonchalance, honed through years of professional poise, Sarah slipped both cups into a plastic bag she'd prepared in her purse, then exited the hall before either twin could notice her. Once safely back in her hotel suite, she called Reynolds. "I have the samples," she said without preamble. 2 cups with saliva residue. "The lab's ready," Reynolds replied. "They've promised results within 24 hours with the rush fee you approved." Sarah carefully sealed the cups in the evidence bags Reynolds had provided, labeling each with the time and location. "I'll have them couriered over immediately, and I need you to do something else for me." "Name it." "I need access to Northwestern Memorial Hospital's archived records from 2003, specifically the maternity ward logs from February 3rd and 4th. Reynolds was quiet for a moment. "Those would be restricted. Possibly digitized by now, but definitely secured." "I still have contacts there," Sarah said. "Melanie Prescott was my supervisor at Landsworth Pharmaceuticals. She's now Director of Information Systems at Northwestern. We've kept in touch through my foundation work. Even directors can't just access patient records without cause," Reynolds cautioned. "I don't need the actual records, just confirmation that certain staff members were working that night. Particularly, I need to verify if anyone named Judith Reynolds was on duty in maternity when the twins disappeared." 2 hours later, Sarah sat at the hotel desk, remotely accessing Northwestern Memorial's personnel archives through credentials Melanie had reluctantly provided for research purposes only. The system was clunky, clearly designed for internal use rather than remote access, but Sarah methodically worked through the employee directories from 2003. There it was, Judith Reynolds, RN, maternity ward, employed from October 2001 to February 28, 2003. She had left the hospital shortly after the twins' disappearance. Sarah dug deeper, searching for Reynolds's subsequent employment history. The connection nearly stopped her heart. 3 months after leaving Northwestern, Judith Reynolds had been hired by the Lawson Foundation as a family health consultant with a starting salary of $150,000, approximately triple her nursing salary. Sarah searched property records next, locating a Judith Reynolds, 68, now living in a modest home in Sacramento. Further digging revealed she had retired from the Lawson Foundation 6 years earlier with a generous pension. The pieces were falling into place with chilling clarity. Sarah printed everything, creating a meticulous file of evidence, then cleared her digital tracks as Reynolds had taught her. By evening, Sarah had compiled a compelling circumstantial case, but she needed more. She needed confession, testimony, irrefutable evidence that would stand up to the inevitable legal challenges Robert Lawson would mount. The following morning, Sarah rented a car and drove the 2 hours to Sacramento, rehearsing her approach. Confronting Judith Reynolds was risky. The woman might alert Lawson immediately, but Sarah calculated it was worth the gamble. People carrying 20-year guilt often craved confession, especially as they aged. Judith Reynolds's house was a well-maintained bungalow on a quiet street lined with mature oak trees. Sarah parked across the street, observing the property. Through the front window she could see movement, an older woman watering plants. After 20 minutes of surveillance confirmed Reynolds appeared to be alone, Sarah approached the front door and rang the bell. The woman who answered looked older than her 68 years, her face deeply lined, her silver hair cut in a practical bob. She wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck and a cardigan despite the mild California winter. "Judith Reynolds?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite her thundering heart. "Yes?" The woman's expression was guarded but polite. "My name is Dr. Sarah Mitchell. I believe you know why I'm here." The color drained from Reynolds's face. Her hand clutched the doorframe for support. I don't know what you're talking about." February 4th, 2003, Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Twin boys taken from their mother's room while she slept. Reynolds's eyes darted past Sarah to the street, as if looking for witnesses or escape. "You should leave." 20 years, Ms. Reynolds," Sarah continued calmly. 20 years I've been searching for my sons. 20 years you've been living with what you did." The older woman's composure cracked. It wasn't my idea." "I know," Sarah interrupted. "It was Robert Lawson's plan. What I don't know is why. Why my babies? Why me?" Reynolds seemed to collapse inward, shoulders slumping. After a long moment, she stepped back. "You'd better come inside." The living room was neat but modest, filled with family photographs and handcrafted Afghans. Reynolds sank into an armchair, suddenly looking very old and very tired. "He said you were depressed," she began, voice barely above a whisper. "That you'd been abandoned by your husband, that you had no family support, no means to care for twins. He said they'd have a better life with him. And you believed that justified stealing my children?" Sarah kept her voice level, though rage boiled beneath her calm exterior. "He paid me $200,000, Reynolds admitted, tears forming. "My husband had cancer. The medical bills. I told myself I was doing what was best for everyone." "Tell me exactly what happened," Sarah demanded. "Every detail." Reynolds' confession poured out, how Lawson had approached her through a former colleague, how he'd detailed the plan to disable security cameras, how she had taken the babies while Sarah slept and delivered them to a private exit where Lawson waited with a medical transport incubator. His wife had died 2 days earlier, Reynolds explained. The story was already circulating that she'd been pregnant, that they were trying to save the babies. No one questioned when he appeared with premature twins. "Did you know his wife had unsuccessful IVF treatments? That there were no actual babies to save?" Sarah pressed. Reynolds nodded miserably. "I found out later, after I started working for the foundation. By then it was too late. I was complicit." Sarah removed a small recording device from her purse. "I need you to state your name and repeat everything you've just told me." "You recorded me without consent?" Reynolds looked alarmed. "This is your chance for redemption, Ms. Reynolds. Those boys, my sons, deserve to know the truth. You can help make that possible." After a moment of internal struggle, the former nurse nodded. "I've lived with this guilt for 20 years. I'll tell you everything." An hour later, Sarah left with a detailed confession, a signed statement, and copies of financial records Reynolds had kept as insurance against Lawson ever turning on her. Back in her hotel room that evening, Sarah's phone rang. It was the lab Reynolds had arranged. "Dr. Mitchell, we have your results." Sarah closed her eyes, though she already knew what they would say. The DNA comparison shows 99.9% compatibility for maternal relationship between subject A, that's you, and subjects B and C from the cup samples. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She ended the call and stood at the window, looking out at the twinkling lights of San Francisco. After 20 years of searching, she had found her sons. After 20 years of building herself into someone powerful enough to reclaim them, she was ready. In her hands, she held irrefutable evidence: DNA confirmation, a confession from Judith Reynolds, financial records showing what amounted to a purchase price for her children, and medical records proving Diana Lawson could not have been pregnant. As she carefully organized each piece of evidence in her file, Sarah knew she had only one chance to do this right, and that chance would come in less than 48 hours, at the gala annual dinner of the Lawson Foundation, where she would confront the man who stole her children in front of the entire medical elite of San Francisco. Sarah stood before the ornate mirror in her hotel suite, studying her reflection with critical precision. The navy Armani suit fit impeccably, its subtle sheen catching the light as she adjusted the pearl necklace at her throat. Tonight was not merely another professional appearance, it was the culmination of 20 years of pain, persistence, and preparation. "You can do this," she whispered to her reflection. The woman staring back bore little resemblance to the devastated young mother who had collapsed on a hospital floor 2 decades earlier. That woman had been broken. This woman was forged from the broken pieces, tempered by grief and determination into something unbreakable. The file containing every piece of evidence lay on the desk beside her evening clutch, too large to bring to the gala. Sarah had spent hours determining which critical documents to carry: the DNA results, Judith Reynolds' signed confession, and photographs of her sons as newborns alongside their current Stanford ID photos. Everything else was backed up digitally, copies sent to Reynolds, her attorney, and a secure cloud server. Her phone chimed with a message from Reynolds. "Security protocols confirmed. Lawson Foundation maintains media presence at all events. Press will be in attendance." Perfect, Sarah thought. Witnesses and documentation would be essential when confronting someone as powerful as Robert Lawson. The Grand Hyatt ballroom glittered with chandeliers and success. San Francisco's medical elite circulated in formal attire, crystal champagne flutes catching the light as conversations flowed around topics of research funding and hospital politics. A string quartet played unobtrusively in the corner while white-gloved servers circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres. Sarah entered alone, her gaze sweeping the room with practiced casualness, while her heart hammered against her ribs. She accepted a champagne flute from a passing server, using it as a prop rather than a beverage. She needed complete clarity tonight. From across the room, she spotted him immediately. Robert Lawson stood near the stage, commanding attention in his bespoke tuxedo, silver hair perfectly coiffed. Beside him stood Michael and Matthew, matching their father's formal attire but with the subtle differences that Sarah had begun to catalog. Michael's confident stance mirroring his father's, Matthew's slightly more reserved posture, hands clasped before him rather than gesturing expansively. "Dr. Mitchell," a conference organizer approached, smiling broadly. "We're so honored you could join us. Your keynote yesterday was extraordinary." "Thank you," Sarah replied warmly, maintaining her professional demeanor through sheer force of will. The Foundation certainly knows how to host an impressive event. "Indeed. Let me introduce you to Dr. Lawson. He specifically mentioned wanting to meet you in person." Before Sarah could respond, she was being guided across the room toward the very confrontation she had planned. though not quite on her terms. Robert Lawson turned as they approached, his practiced smile never reaching his eyes. "Dr. Mitchell," he extended his hand, "your reputation precedes you. Your work on childhood trauma recovery has influenced practitioners worldwide." Sarah accepted his handshake, fighting the urge to recoil from the touch of the man who had stolen her children. "Dr. Lawson, I've followed your foundation's work as well. Allow me to introduce my sons," Lawson continued, motioning the twins forward. "Michael and Matthew, both residents here at Stanford. They attended your keynote and were quite impressed." Sarah turned to face her sons directly for the first time in 20 years. The world seemed to slow around her as she extended her hand first to Michael. "It's a pleasure to meet you," she said, her voice steady despite the emotional tempest within. His hand was warm, his grip firm, just like Andrew's had been. "Your integration of neurological understanding with psychological approaches is groundbreaking," Michael said, professional admiration evident in his tone. "Thank you," Sarah replied, then turned to Matthew. As their eyes met, she saw a flicker of something, confusion, recognition, curiosity, cross his features. "Dr. Mitchell," Matthew said softly, "your work on expressing trauma through creative modalities rather than strictly verbal processing changed my entire approach to patient care." As their hands touched, Sarah felt an electric current of connection. This close, the resemblance was unmistakable. The shape of his eyes, the set of his jaw, a perfect blend of her features with Andrew's. The master of ceremonies tapped a microphone, drawing everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, please find your seats. Our program will begin shortly." Sarah was escorted to the head table, finding herself seated just 3 places away from Robert Lawson with the twins at a neighboring table. Throughout the elaborate dinner, she maintained her composed facade while acutely aware of every movement from the Lawson family. Matthew, she noticed, glanced her way several times with an expression of puzzled interest. After dessert was served, the formal program began with recognition of major donors and presentation of research grants. Sarah half listened, mentally rehearsing what would come next. According to the program, she would be introduced as a special guest following the awards presentation. "And now," announced the Master of Ceremonies, "we have the honor of recognizing our distinguished guest, the renowned Dr. Sarah Mitchell, psychologist and award-winning author, who has joined us this evening following her brilliant keynote at the symposium." Sarah rose as applause filled the room, walking with measured steps to the podium. Looking out at the assembled medical elite, she spotted Reynolds standing discreetly near the exit, confirming everything was in place. "Thank you for that kind introduction," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. "It's a privilege to be among so many dedicated to healing." She paused, her gaze finding Robert Lawson's face. A flicker of unease crossed his features as their eyes locked. "Before I offer my thanks, I'd like to share a story with you all," Sarah continued, abandoning her planned brief remarks. "A story about trauma, loss, and the search for truth, themes central to my work." The room quieted, attention focused on her unexpected narrative turn. "Exactly 20 years and 3 months ago, I gave birth to twin boys at Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago," Sarah said, her voice steady. 19 hours of labor, alone, abandoned by my husband who had decided fatherhood didn't align with his career ambitions. She noticed Robert Lawson shifting uncomfortably in his chair, beginning to recognize where this might be heading. "The next morning, while I slept, a woman posing as a nurse entered my room and took my sons, claiming it was for routine tests." Sarah's gaze swept the room, settling briefly on the twins, who were listening with professional interest, unaware they were hearing their own origin story. "My sons disappeared without a trace. Security cameras had been disabled. Records were altered. Police investigations led nowhere." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Robert Lawson's face had drained of color. He caught the eye of an assistant, murmuring something urgently. "Dr. Lawson," Sarah turned directly to him, abandoning all pretense. Perhaps you'd like to tell everyone how you lost your wife tragically in February 2003, yet somehow acquired newborn twin boys within days of her death. The room fell completely silent. All eyes darted between Sarah and Robert, who was now rising from his seat, his expression thunderous. Or perhaps, Sarah continued relentlessly, you could explain how your wife, Diana, miraculously conceived after 5 documented failed IVF attempts? Or how 2 babies supposedly born prematurely after her death have birth records that trace back to another hospital, another mother? This is outrageous. Robert finally found his voice, though it shook with barely controlled rage. Security, please remove Dr. Mitchell immediately. That won't be necessary, Sarah replied calmly, removing documents from her clutch. I have here DNA test results confirming I am the biological mother of Michael and Matthew Lawson. I have sworn statements from Judith Reynolds, the nurse you paid $200,000 to abduct my children. I have the original birth records from Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Chaos erupted in the ballroom. Guests whispered urgently to one another. Several phones were raised, recording the confrontation. The twins sat frozen in shock, color draining from their faces as they stared first at Sarah, then at the man they'd believed was their father. Dad? Matthew's voice cut through the commotion, the single syllable laden with confusion and dawning horror. What is she talking about? Michael stood abruptly. This is absurd. Tell her she's mistaken. Robert Lawson took a step toward the podium, desperation replacing his initial anger. I can explain. This woman is clearly disturbed. Then explain the DNA match, Sarah interrupted. Explain why Diana's obstetrician of record doesn't exist. Explain the $200,000 payment to Nurse Reynolds after she left Northwestern. The security team hesitated, uncertain who to approach in the increasingly tense standoff. Several guests were openly recording now, the scandal unfolding before them too sensational to ignore. Father? Matthew had risen now, approaching the head table with Michael close behind. Is any of this true? Robert's expression shifted, calculation replacing outrage as he realized his position was untenable. Diana, we lost another baby before, he said, his voice softening strategically. She couldn't have survived losing another. When I heard about twins available. Available? Sarah's voice cracked with 20 years of suppressed rage. My sons weren't available, Dr. Lawson. They were stolen from me while I slept. While you were building your reputation as a heroic widower raising twins alone, I spent nights awake wondering if my babies were alive or dead. Michael took a step back, his face contorted in shock. You stole us? It was an act of love, Robert pleaded, reaching for his sons. Diana had just died. I was devastated. The nurse approached me, said there was a single mother, abandoned, who couldn't possibly care for 2 children. So you decided you had more right to them than I did? Sarah's voice trembled with emotion. That your money, your prestige gave you the right to shatter my life? Security finally approached, but stopped uncertainly, clearly unsure which party they should be removing. Matthew, who had been silent, slowly approached Sarah. His eyes, her eyes, studied her face with newfound recognition. We have your eyes, he said simply, his voice barely audible above the murmurs filling the ballroom. I always wondered where they came from. The silence in the Grand Hyatt ballroom seemed to stretch endlessly as Matthew's words hung in the air. We have your eyes. I always wondered where they came from. The simple observation, spoken with quiet certainty, broke something open in the room, a truth too powerful to contain any longer. Cameras flashed as security personnel finally moved toward the podium, uncertain whether to remove Sarah or protect her. Robert Lawson stood frozen, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Before anyone could speak further, the head of the foundation's board stepped to the microphone. I believe we should continue this discussion privately, he said firmly. This event is now concluded. Please respect the family's privacy during this difficult time. The following 48 hours unfolded in a blur of activity. News vans camped outside the hotel as the story exploded across national media. Renowned neurosurgeon accused of kidnapping twins 20 years ago. Sarah, Michael, and Matthew were quietly moved to a private suite at another hotel, while Robert Lawson faced the initial onslaught of legal consequences. His hospital privileges suspended pending investigation, the foundation board calling an emergency meeting, former colleagues distancing themselves with carefully worded statements. In the suite's living room, Sarah sat across from her sons, the silence between them heavy with 2 decades of lost time. The initial shock had given way to a cautious, painful curiosity. Michael paced near the windows, his movements tense and controlled, while Matthew sat still, studying Sarah's face as if memorizing every feature. "Our grandmother," Michael finally said, breaking the silence. "What was she like?" Sarah's breath caught at the simple question. "She loved gardening," she answered softly. "She grew the most beautiful roses in Illinois. She died when you were 3 months along in my pregnancy. She wanted so badly to meet you both." The conversation began haltingly, brief questions, careful answers. Sarah showed them photographs she'd brought, her parents, her college graduation, the ultrasound image she'd carried for 20 years. She told them about her pregnancy, about the nursery she had prepared, about how she had chosen their names. "You kept our names," Matthew observed quietly. "He did," Sarah nodded. "I've often wondered why." "Easier to maintain the lie, probably," Michael said bitterly. "Harder to slip up if he used the names on your original birth certificates." As evening deepened into night, the questions became more pointed, more painful. "And our biological father?" Matthew finally asked, his voice carefully neutral. "You mentioned he abandoned you when you were pregnant." Sarah hesitated, weighing how much to share. "His name is Andrew Mitchell. He is a neurosurgeon. He chose his career over family. He told me he couldn't have the distraction of a wife and children while building his reputation." Michael laughed without humor. "Like father, not father," he said, glancing toward the door as if Robert might materialize. "Robert, Dad," he corrected himself, then shook his head in frustration. "Always said our careers had to come first. Excellence wasn't optional." "You called him Robert just now," Matthew noted quietly. "I don't know what to call him anymore," Michael admitted. "Everything I thought I knew about myself feels like a lie." The brothers shared a look of profound understanding. Despite their different reactions, Michael's anger, Matthew's quiet contemplation, they were united in their disorientation. "Did you ever stop looking for us?" Matthew asked, turning back to Sarah. "Never," she answered immediately. "Not for a single day. Every decision I made, my education, my career, where I lived, it was all to position myself to find you. I needed resources, connections, credibility." "The Mitchell method," Michael said slowly. "Your therapeutic approach for traumatized children. You developed that for us, didn't you? For when you found us." Sarah nodded, tears finally spilling over. "I needed to understand trauma to help you heal when I found you. I never imagined you'd be studying my work in medical school." By the third morning, a fragile rapport had formed. Over breakfast, Sarah learned about their childhood, their interests, their achievements, the dynamic between them. Michael had always been the leader, more aggressive in pursuing their father's approval. Matthew had been the peacemaker, the more introspective brother who questioned what others accepted. "He wasn't a bad father," Matthew said, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "That's what makes this so difficult. He loved us, in his way." "His way included stealing us from our mother," Michael countered sharply. "I'm not excusing it," Matthew clarified. "I'm trying to reconcile the man who taught us to ride bikes and helped with science projects with the man who committed this crime." That afternoon, as they sat reviewing old photographs Sarah had brought, a hotel staff member knocked at the door. Dr. Lawson is in the lobby requesting to see his sons." The twins exchanged a long look, communicating silently as only they could. "We'll see him," Michael decided, "but not alone." Robert Lawson appeared dramatically diminished when he entered the suite. His normally immaculate appearance was disheveled, suit wrinkled, hair uncombed, dark circles under his eyes. He stopped short when he saw Sarah, fear and defiance warring in his expression. "Boys," he began, his voice breaking, "please, I need to explain—" "Explain what?" Michael interrupted coldly. "How you built our entire lives on a lie? How you stole us from our mother?" "I know what I did was unforgivable," Robert said, sinking into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 65 years. "But you have to understand, I loved you from the moment I saw you. Everything I've done since has been for you." "Was she part of your plan?" Matthew asked quietly, nodding toward Sarah. "Did you intend to destroy her life, or was that just collateral damage?" Robert closed his eyes briefly. "The nurse, Judith, she approached me after Diana died, said there was a young mother, abandoned, without resources, who'd just delivered twins, said the mother was considering giving them up, that they could disappear from the hospital and no one would question it if they appeared with me instead." "That's a lie," Sarah said evenly. "I never considered giving up my sons. Not for 1 second. I believed what I wanted to believe," Robert admitted. "Diana and I had tried for so long to have children. When she died, I wasn't thinking clearly. I saw a chance to save something from the wreckage." "By creating a new wreckage," Sarah observed. The conversation continued for hours, painful, circular, with moments of raw confession followed by desperate justification. Robert admitted to paying Judith Reynolds, to falsifying records, to creating an elaborate fiction about Diana's pregnancy. "What happens now?" Michael finally asked, directing the question not to Robert but to Sarah. "The prosecutor is considering multiple charges," she answered. "Kidnapping, falsifying government documents, obstruction of justice. I've provided my evidence, but I haven't pushed for maximum penalties." "You haven't?" Matthew looked surprised. "Revenge won't give me back the years I lost with you," Sarah said simply. "What matters now is what you both want going forward." Robert leaned forward desperately. "Please, boys, you're my life's work, my legacy. Everything I've built has been for you." "We're not your work," Michael said sharply. "We're people you stole." In the days that followed, as legal proceedings began against Robert Lawson, Sarah, Michael, and Matthew started the delicate process of building a relationship. There were awkward pauses, painful revelations, and moments of unexpected connection. Sarah learned that Matthew had her love for Russian literature, while Michael had inherited Andrew's perfect pitch and musical ability, though he'd abandoned piano lessons to focus on medicine. The twins met their extended family through video calls, cousins they never knew existed, aunts and uncles who had mourned at their funeral, old family friends who remembered Sarah's pregnancy. Each connection filled in another piece of their fragmented identity. 3 months later, as spring brought new life to Boston, Michael and Matthew stood in Sarah's Beacon Hill apartment, examining the room she had maintained for them all these years. "It's strange," Matthew said, picking up a baseball glove sized for a 10-year-old. "Seeing all these alternate versions of ourselves." "I didn't know who you'd become," Sarah explained from the doorway. "So I tried to imagine every possibility." The twins had decided to transfer their medical residencies to Boston hospitals, Michael to Massachusetts General, Matthew to Boston Children's Hospital. They had found an apartment nearby, close enough for regular visits but maintaining their independence as they navigated their new reality. Robert Lawson had accepted a plea deal, 5 years in federal prison followed by probation, his medical license permanently revoked. The Lawson Foundation's assets were being redirected to support organizations for missing children and victims of adoption fraud. The sentence had been reduced in consideration of his cooperation and previous contributions to medicine. On a rainy afternoon 6 months after the confrontation in San Francisco, Matthew found Sarah in her home office, reviewing patient files. "Do you hate him?" he asked suddenly. "Robert, do you hate him for what he did?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "For many years, I hated the nameless, faceless person who took you. I imagined them as a monster. But now, I understand he was a broken man who did something terrible believing it was from love. That doesn't justify it, but it explains it." "He did love us," Michael said from the doorway, having overheard the conversation. "That's the hardest part to reconcile. He stole us from you, built his life on your pain, but he did love us." "The world rarely divides neatly into heroes and villains," Sarah replied. "He took you from me, but gave you opportunities and love. I lost you, but that loss drove me to help hundreds of other traumatized children. We can't undo the past. We can only decide what to do with our present." That Christmas, their first together, Sarah placed 2 carefully wrapped packages before her sons. Inside each was a small blanket, preserved in a cedar box, along with 20 years of letters, one written on each birthday, documenting her search, her love, her unwavering belief that they would someday be reunited. "I never gave up," she said simply, as tears flowed freely among the 3 of them. "I never stopped looking for you." Michael took her hand, his earlier anger softened by months of understanding. "And we always felt something was missing, until now." While Robert Lawson faced his first night in federal prison, Sarah Mitchell sat in the living room of her Boston apartment, watching her sons, now grown men, sleeping on the sofa after a marathon of Christmas movies. The circle had closed. Justice, though delayed, had arrived. Sarah no longer needed to search. Her sons had finally found their way home. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.